Yo, what is going on, YouTube? Hope you guys are doing fantastic today. Today, we're going to be doing a tier list. Mario said, Bobby, you need to get a tier list out there. I said, sure. I'll get one out Friday. Friday is now here. I'm going to get you guys tier list. This is going to be for ranked. So any level ranked as accurate as I can. And I'm going to be including some of the best assassins we've seen over the years, some of the best mages, and then warriors, and just add them into the tier list also. So it's not going to be just Guardians. It's going to be my opinion of the best gods in Smite with their supporting. I'm not going to go over every single god because 90% of gods in Smite would be in just like the F tier. And then I'm going to have a clear cut. From now on, I'm going to try to have a clear cut best support currently. You probably already know who it is, but We'll wait until we get there to confirm it. Also, Tuesday, Thursdays, from here on out on YouTube and TikTok, we're going to be having really short god guides. It'll tell you about like their best roles, how do they play, how do you want to play them, and then short little build guides also in them. They're going to be about a minute long, and you'll just be able to learn a little bit about those gods if you don't really know entirely how you want to play them or how they play, and that's what they'll be. So without further ado, sorry for taking so long. Let's jump into this tier list. All right, we're going to be going just A to Z, or A to Y. There's no Z god that I'm including. Starting with Aries. For ranked, I think Aries is a pretty solid god. He's got good pressure. He's really good with the 3 camp clear because his 3 does percent minion health, which is actually OP. His weaknesses, he's not very strong in rotations because he's just easily picked in the jungle. He has no safety really. Currently though, there's not a big reason to be in the jungle for supports. So not being as safe, you don't have to milk or anything like that. Not being as safe is not as bad. He is a little blink reliant, which is a downside sometimes, but in ranked, I don't think it means as much. I think Aries is an actually pretty solid spot. I think he's about an A tier character. Before we go any farther, there's the best support tier, which is just, this is the best support in the game right now. Learn them, play them a lot. S tier is, these are the top gods in the game. Play them if they are opened. Also know how to play them. A is average, B is below average, C is not good, and F is currently, right now, in my opinion, do not play them in support. Next up, Ardeo. If there's a meta that Ardeo should be strong in, it's a 2v2 meta. She's very, very good. She's got good push, not great camp clear. She has good fight, not great minion clear, but she trades well and she builds med, and she can just kind of sit in lane and just kind of bully you out, play for bastions, play for purple buffs, and I think she does that really well. Her problem is she has no immunity. There are a couple items, though, in the game right now that give her immunity. Magi's is really strong right now. Absolution is strong. I don't think it's great on Ardeo because you can't really just transform when you want, but it's still another option just as a maybe you get a cleanse that's good for your transformation, or you can kind of play in one and then transform when you need the immunity. But I think that helps her out a lot because you don't really want to go beads on Ardeo. You want to play aggressive. You want to be bullying, build relics that help your team. And I think she does that pretty okay right now. I think she's about in the same tier as Aries. I think she's about an A tier level god. Next up, Athena. Athena's in a really good spot right now, especially in ranked. She can bully in lane. She clears pretty well on buffs and in lane. She 2v2s well, and she scales pretty well into the late game. The global ult allows you to just be able to not rotate as well as the enemy, and they still get punished for it, or if they look for a bad gank, they'll get punished for it. I also ever since they changed her ult to give her immunity or mitigations when she's ulting, I think it made it so she can just play a lot more aggressively and still just ult out to safety. I think she's one of the better gods in the game for ranked. I think you should learn how to play Athena. She's not very hard to play, but I think she's very good. Max your 2, put a couple points into your 3, obviously, to get a little bit of damage, and then play around your taunt, play for relics, and then just play to blow up the enemy support. I think you should get used to using Sunder on her because that's probably her best relic. The exploding Sunder, so if the enemy tries to walk at you, following up your taunt, you can actually get a big splash Sunder. Athena, though, very, very good. I think she's an S tier god. Next up, Atlas. I don't think I'm as high on Atlas as a lot of other people. I think he's in an okay spot. Honestly, average is like the perfect word to describe him right now. I think his build is okay. He doesn't really clear wave very well. He doesn't clear buffs very well. He's pretty okay at it. He's got a solid 2v2 fight. He scales well into the late game, yes, but he has a lack of immunity. We talked about Ardeo. Doesn't really matter as much because she's got 2 options. Same with Atlas, and his option is better for Absolution because he can actually time when he wants to use it for the immunity. So I think that helps him out a lot. But I do think with this 2v2 meta, I think he loses a lot of 2v2s to the top tiers. I think he goes just about even with Athena, but I think her global in ranked is just a lot better than Atlas's. Atlas will always have the upside of when you get to late game, he can almost one-shot carries with like a divine and then maybe one other damage item. And I think that's always going to be good. That's always going to be valuable. And I think that if he was a little bit better in the laning phase, I think he could see an S tier push, but because he's just average in the laning phase, I think I'm going to keep him in A tier. Bacchus. For now, it just seems like all these gods are just really average. They don't do anything great. They don't do anything. Well, they do some things great, but they're not great all around. Bacchus's biggest change to this patch was making his 1 a heal, and then them changing regrowth into breastplate of regrowth from shield of regrowth. Giving it protections helps out Bacchus, helps out every other god that builds that item so much more. The trade for health for protections is always going to be really big in support because a lot of your items already have health. And I think this helps out Bacchus a ton. He's now allowed to play this harass style of smite where he can just go in, get a lot of damage off, ult so you can't get hit, and then speed away with your heal. And I think it makes him really hard to deal with. I do think he's also a little bit overrated. Same tier as like Atlas. Like he is slightly overrated. I think his damage right now is still pretty low. I think people just kind of live in the past where they think he does actually a lot of damage. And honestly, I think Atlas does more damage than Bacchus, and it's easier damage. Bacchus just has a little bit more CC. And I think his ult CC should be used at the beginning of fights instead of just trying to kill people. A lot of times people try to use Bacchus ult as like an execute when it's a 6-second, I can't remember the name of it. Intoxicate, I think is the name of the CC, where it is very hard to control your character and hit abilities. And that's 6 seconds where the enemy is just going to be hitting less abilities than you. And it said a lot. The best way to avoid damage in smite is movement speed so you can juke people. Another way to do it is to CC the enemy so they can't hit you also. Silencing, stunning, stuff like that. Intoxicate. Intoxicate is kind of just making it so the enemy does not hit his abilities as easily. So I think that is a very underrated part of his kit. His damage, like I said, I don't think it's too great. But I think his ability to just get in the back line, do a little bit of damage so that his team can clean up is very strong. Baron. I thought Baron would be a bit stronger coming into this. I think the power would make it so he can clear a little bit better, play for his 2v2 a little bit more. I don't know if it's just a feel thing. I've never really been a big Baron player, so maybe that's the biggest thing. I just think he doesn't do enough comparatively to the Guardians and the other mages. I think he doesn't really have a great build path right now. I think like a cloak into binding is fine. I don't think Lonos is that great. I think a lot of the times I'd rather have benevolence or sentinels because I think losing out on power for mages is a lot of the time the reason you're playing them is because of how much power they're or how much damage they're doing. Even if it doesn't seem like a lot, it adds up over time, the damage reduction. Your damage given out reduced. Personally, I think Baron is in a pretty below average spot in support. I think he actually is in a pretty solid spot for solo lane, but I can't really speak on that too much because I don't know enough about it. But yeah, keeping Baron average or below average, sorry. Next up, Cabrakin. For supports in ranked, I think Cabrakin is in a good spot. I think walls on this current map are so strong. And I think his ult being on a 75-second cooldown makes it so he can just kind of run at the enemy and kind of harass them. I also think the binding change made Cabrakin absolutely phenomenal. He doesn't need to go thieves anymore. Cabrakin was one of the few gods that I thought binding may have been worth last year. Even though the item was just pretty meh to below average, I think I still wanted to build it on Cabrakin because of how just well he used it. But now it's this new item. It scales into the late game. I think it's perfect for Cabrakin. He can build into that, and then he can build into a couple more defensive options, and then he can build into a power item to actually threaten the backline. And he really only needs one item to actually truly half health or over half health an enemy squishy, and you pull relics really easily. I also think he's in a very good spot for pulling a relic and then punishing right after because he has 2 stuns. Also, if you know they don't have beads and your stun is available, you can 2 to stun and then 1 to stun and have about a 3-second stun against the enemy where if they don't have beads, they kind of just die. And I think that is very strong. It allows him to pick frontline. It allows him to pick backline. He might be a little unsafe, and I think his early game is a little bit weaker because of his damage just getting dropped a lot. But I still think past level 4 or 5, once he gets his ult, I think he's very strong, and I think you need to learn him. Serb, I don't know what it is with this character, but every time I play him, I feel like I'm just squishy. I don't do damage. My abilities are pretty useless. My ult, even though it feels like it should be good, is just getting immuned by a knockup immunity, or they're jumping away from it, or they're ulting it because it takes so long to go out. He doesn't really win laning phases. He makes it so med feels bad to build in dual lane. But because of how just weak his kind of 2v2 is anyway, you can just go shell and still win the 2v2 against him. Overall, I just think Serb, ever since they changed his prot shred, they reduced it a lot. I think he just felt so bad, and I haven't been wanting to go back to him and play him. I've even played against him a few times, and he just doesn't seem impactful. I wouldn't really touch him until he gets some sort of buffs, or maybe a build comes out that I think is strong. I might have to try like a cloak into binding build just to see how it feels, or Abyssal Stone just to see how that feels also. But his cooldowns are so long. I don't know. I don't really see a reason to play Serb. I don't know what he does that other gods don't other than anti-heal, but then Bacchus has anti-heal and Sobek has anti-heal, and I prefer their kits overall over Cerberus, especially Bacchus. I think you should not play Serb. His 1 is also a really hard skill shot with meh payoff. Like a ranged stun is always going to be good, but it's pretty easy to juke, so I wouldn't recommend Serb, and I don't think he's very good right now. Cthulhu. I'm kind of a Cthulhu fiend when it comes to playing him in support. He's actually got a pretty strong 2v2. He has good base damage. He has pretty low cooldown on his 1. It also reduces the enemy's damage and their attack speed. So overall, I think Cthulhu's in a pretty solid spot in his 2v2. He also scales well into the late game as a peel machine. He has a knock-up. He's got a heal that also gives movement speed, so he's a really good team fighter. And then the builds currently, I was building Thebes into him. I think I might move over to Cloak now, like a Cloak into Binding, into Renewal if they don't have anti-heal, and then Compassion. You can soak up just a lot of damage and also be healing your team, reducing their protections, and just doing a lot of stuff. So I've been really liking Cthulhu. I don't think he's like phenomenal or anything, but I think he's in a pretty solid spot, especially for support. I do think he's still probably better in solo lane, even though solos need to be able to clear. I don't know exactly how it works in solo lane right now, but Cthulhu support feels pretty good. Next up, Eset. I haven't played enough Eset to really have a good grasp on her, but same as Baron, she just doesn't feel too great right now. I think what Guardians do and how they can use their just extra tankiness and extra CC just makes it feel a lot better. I think she's gotten a lot of nerfs over the past few weeks also, and she doesn't feel as great. But Absolution helps her a lot in support. She can just drop ult when she's getting gone on, and it gives her immunity. So if she's getting froze by Ymir, or if she's getting pulled by somebody, or Serqet blinks on her, she can just drop her ult for some immunity, which I think helps her a good amount. But I still think her laning phase is pretty meh. I think her buff clear is pretty meh also. She has ranged autos, which is nice, but I think she's a pretty easy gank most of the time in dual lane because of how long the lane is. So overall, I think she's pretty meh. I also wouldn't want to really play her in ranked, because you're kind of just helping your team more than you're doing a lot of stuff. If you silence somebody, your team has to be ready to follow up. If you stun somebody, they have to be ready to follow up. And it's not too obvious when it's happening outside of your 2. So yeah, I think Eset below average. Fafnir. I'm going to put him in B tier, but I think he's just in a bad spot comparatively to last year. Overall, his 2v2 is not that bad, but it's also not very good. His buff clear is very bad. His lane clear is very bad, but he fights pretty well because of how much CC and like auto attacks he reduces from the enemy. Overall, you're really relying on your team when you play Fafnir. A lot of your stuff comes from making your team do more damage, which Genetics actually says in one of his videos, his tier list video. If you haven't seen that, also check that out, because you should have as many perspectives as you can on support, because I'm not going to just know everything. So also Genetics, very good support YouTuber. He's been getting into it a little bit. You don't really need more damage right now in Smite. You kind of kill pretty easily, so you don't really need more damage. You need to keep your team alive, and Fafnir doesn't really do that well. Walking to objectives, it also doesn't feel like objectives are doing as much damage. They're just a little bit tankier. So I think just having somebody that can keep your team alive as you're doing the objectives just feels a little bit better than doing a little bit extra damage on them. You also want to be ready to fight around them, and Faf doesn't really do that badly, but I just don't think it feels as good playing Fafnir. I think there's a lot of other gods that do what Fafnir does. Not nearly as good, but well enough that you would take the rest of the parts of their kits over Fafnir's. Fenrir, everyone's going to be asking about the assassins, so I figure I had to add them. Every time a new map comes out, it's happened every year. Double jungle becomes a thing for a couple weeks, couple months, until you realize you're just going to get out farmed. I think that is the kind of thing that's happening right now. I think Fenrir full tank support is fine. It's always going to be good to be able to just ult somebody and bring them back to your team and kill them. But with Absolution, with Magi's, with Beads still being an option, and all these possibilities to build if Fenrir is playing against you, I think Fenrir feels worse than he has in a long time, since like his nerfs to his base abilities, his 1 cooldown, his 1's damage. A lot of his strength is put into his 3 now, which isn't really optimal for support. So I think Fenrir doesn't feel too great. He's still probably one of the better assassin supports, but I still don't think he is warranting of a big pick rate right now in support. Ganesh, I'll always think Ganesh is a pretty average ranked god. He's not terrible. I'm going to put him in below average because I think his kit right now is pretty bad with the buff to Wingblade. Wingblade makes it so if you see a Ganesh on the enemy team, buy Wingblade and just give your team a sprint whenever Ganesh drops ult, and then just run over it. If you didn't know, right here, Mario can put it somewhere. I'm going to point right here, so this is maybe where you can put it. Wingblade now gives an aura buff to movement speed that also cleanses slows. So gods like Ganesh that only rely on slows, or a one-man stun and a silence. Like, he doesn't have very good hard CC. If he relies on slows, Wingblade just kind of kills his entire kit and really stops his engage potential from his ult. I think that hurts him a lot. I think he's still a solid god and punishing the bad diving in ranked, and I think he does that pretty well. But it really does hurt him that a Wingblade, instead of having to go sprint in some games, Wingblade is now just super strong, a really good counter against Ganesh, so I think that hurts him a lot. Geb. I'm putting him in C tier. I don't care. I think Geb is very bad in ranked. If you want to keep your team alive, I'd rather have a Ganesh. I'd rather have a Khepri. I'd rather have a Sylv. I'd rather have a Terra, a Yemoja. There's a lot better backline gods. And I think the overall mediocre kits in season 1 are starting to fall behind. I think right now Geb is getting hit the hardest with it. I think his 1 is pretty meh. I think his 3 is pretty meh. I think his 2 is fine. His ult is fine. His passive is pretty meh. He just doesn't do enough right now. He's really bad 2v2. So if you play him in 2v2, you lose, or you're going to be getting an amazing late game god. I think not really currently. He gives one person a shield and then a little bit of CC, and then that's about it. I would rather have a lot of other gods that are stronger in the 2v2, that scale almost as well late game, if not better late game, and I think that's what Geb struggles with right now, so I'm not a big Geb fan in ranked. Hercules, if you can hit his combo, I think is very, very good rank support right now. Being able to go whatever item into regrowth, I think helps him out a lot. You can go Thieves into regrowth, you can go Cloak into regrowth, you can go Binding into regrowth, and it's going to feel fantastic just because of how strong regrowth is right now. The same reason Bacchus feels really good. Bacchus can get into the back line and then run away. Hercules can just pop his 3, get into the back line, and then pick off somebody. And it's kind of the same thing as Bacchus. I just think it's done slightly better. Hercules' damage, more single target, yes, but I think it's more threat onto the enemy, especially in the early game because of how much damage was added to his passive. The buff to his 3, giving him attack speed, wasn't as big as I thought, because you really aren't getting that many auto attacks off in that time, but it's still just giving him extra damage and extra threat in the early game. So I think that is a help to him. I think he's an average support god, but I think he's going to be in a strong spot in ranked, and you should learn kind of how to play him. Horus, I just have not felt like Horus is doing enough currently, especially in ranked. People don't really play around your ult. People walk away from you a lot, so it's hard to 3 them. If you 1-2 somebody, it gives them a long time to punish that one person. But Smite is a 5v5 team play game. Once you get to late game, you're kind of relying on your ult being your game winner. Your 2-1 is just on one person, and a lot of the time you'll just die if you try to go in because of the threat potential the enemy will have on killing you. So I haven't felt like Horus has felt too strong. Regrowth does make him feel a little bit better than how bad he should feel, but I still think he's in just a pretty bad spot, and I don't think he feels too strong. I feel like, because he's a Guardian, I have to talk about him. He is the worst support in the game right now. Out of everyone in this list, I would not want a Yorm on my team. He pushes wave pretty well, but he doesn't scale well. His mid game is pretty bad. His CC is pretty bad. And you're kind of relying on the enemy team being bad if you're playing Yorm. If they are bad, you can play Yorm, and it's probably going to feel fine. But as soon as you get into some games where the team kind of know what they're doing, I think Yorm is going to feel even worse. Khepri, one of the back line peeling gods that feels the best. I'm actually going to put him in S tier because I think a lot of the time, all you want in your support is a god that can just make your job easy as like a mid laner or as a solo laner or a jungler. And I think Khepri does that really well in ranked. It's really obvious when Khepri's looking to do something because he's going to 2 somebody and then he's going to pull them. Or he's going to pull them and you have 2 seconds to react. Or he's going to root them and then keep walking at them and then he's going to pull and stuff like that. And it's really obvious when Khepri's looking to do something. He's also one of the best peeling gods in the game. His 2 makes you so you're taking 30% less damage. His ult makes it so if you don't have relics, he can give you another life, and it's a time delay thing. So if you are sitting in the back line diving this person that's Khepri ulted, either you kill him, and then he walks back to Khepri, or gets brought back to Khepri, or you don't kill him and you stand around and you're going to be taking damage from the enemy ADC or mid, whoever you're not going on. Khepri does that all really well. Khepri has mediocre buff clear, but he's a really good 2v2 god because of his passive. He also scales well into the late game because of his passive. Overall, Khepri can build just about any relic also. His one problem is that he doesn't have CC immunity, but Absolution helps that a lot. So a lot of these old problems that Khepri has aren't really problems anymore. Should be talked about, though, that he does have one of the biggest models in the game. So you are going to be caught out in the jungle a little bit easier. Gods like Cabrakin and Ymir that wall you are going to be really hard to deal with because the wall is going to be extra effective and it's going to be harder for you to get through those little areas. But still, Phantom Shell is going to be a viable option, and he's going to have those problems kind of anyway. But you're not really going to be walking through the jungle as much because you're not going to be playing into the jungle for those reasons. So I think Khepri actually feels really good right now. Kumba's either talked about as one of the worst gods in the game now or one of the best. I think Weaken had him in S tier. And then I think Genetics had him in F tier or D tier or whatever their top and second highest or lowest tiers are. I think overall Kumba's a pretty average god now, below average god. What he does is plays for relics and plays to punish the enemy that has no relics. His 2 getting a cripple makes it so it is very, very easy to get a pick onto somebody if they either don't see you coming or if they are not ready for you. It is really easy to just ult them and then have your 2 prepped for as they're coming down. You can just root them immediately and they're crippled and they either have to blow beads or they have to ult or whatever. His 2v2 is also really strong because of how often his 2 is up. He threatens you and you kind of have to respect him. Otherwise, you're going to be taking a good amount of damage. His sleepy time allows him to bait a lot easier, being on a 2-minute cooldown instead of 3 minutes and then 4 minutes from even a couple seasons ago. So think that makes him feel a lot better. Those are some of the positives. The negatives are he's very blink reliant, or he's very team engaging for him reliant. His 2v2 is not bad, but it's not great because he doesn't clear well. His buff clear is pretty meh to bad. His 1 is probably one of the worst abilities in the game. And then his ult, if you aren't on the same page, can kind of screw over an entire team fight. So you have to be careful ulting. There's these clear upsides and these clear downsides, but I think Kumba in the middle, I think he's completely below average support. Kuzenbo. I think Kuzenbo's in a good spot right now. He is obviously blink reliant because the only thing he does is he dives the backline, and it's obvious what he's going to be doing. If you pick a Kuzenbo and you don't build blink, you're kind of trolling. You're picking Kuzenbo to dive the backline and to kill the enemy mage or to kill the enemy hunter. And he does both of those jobs pretty well right now. He does a good amount of damage. He has good cooldown resets with his 2. And then he also redirects a lot of damage. And even if he can't kill you, he will get you very low. And his passive makes it so he's very, very tanky. I do think he has a couple gods where he has a problem with because of the CC they have. His passive is very reliant on him not getting knocked around and knocked up. So playing into gods like Morgan, who can kind of knock you up off them, or playing into like Sobeks and stuff like that, it makes you feel like you're a little bit less tanky than you usually would be. So you have to be careful into matchups like that. But he does dive the backline really well right now. You can even build Relic Dagger just so you can dive a little bit more often. But I also think he's very good at clearing, and he's got a pretty good 2v2 right now also. His problems are he does one thing. That's all he does. He dives the backline. If you're playing Kuzenbo to peel, you're kind of trolling, and I think he's pretty bad at that. Or by pretty bad, I'd probably rather have a Yorm peeling for me than a Kuzenbo. But what he does is he dives, and he dives well. Maui, I don't want to talk about him too much because he is still the best character in the game. I think even after his nerfs, he will still be top 2 at the bare minimum. He's just incredible. I'll just rattle off a couple things that he does really well. He 2v2s, he peels, he clears buffs well, he auto attacks AoE, he can set up, he can play for relics, he can pull relics, he can punish relics, he is safe. He can jump over walls, which is insane. If you don't know on this current map, it's very good to have a jump. All these things he does very, very well. He scales well into the late game. What doesn't he do well? Honestly, I can't think of a single thing that he does not do well, because even Yemoja has the weakness of having no CC immunity. So Maui, absolutely bonkers, absolutely busted. Play Maui, learn Maui.
Ne Zha.
I think Ne Zha's a better assassin support than Fafnir right now because of the Bastions. I think he's really decent at the 2v2 in lane. I think he's got solid buff clear, not great because there's so many minions you have to clear, but he does have the AoE auto. But he plays for Bastions really well, and I think the Breastplate of Renewal also makes it so he lives very long also. He builds Cloak easy because he can get stacks very easy playing with his 3 or his 1, and he can also just hit the Bastion to poke it down and to poke the enemy. So I think he does stuff very well. Problem is he's very one-person reliant. He has 2 CCs, but they only hit 1 person. His peel is not great at all. It's actually rather bad. You have to either blow your ult to pull 1 person, and then you can't really peel for the rest of against the rest of the guys, or you 3 them, and then your main form of engage is gone. I don't think he's blink reliant, and I think that's a misconception. I don't think he's at all blink reliant in support. Maybe in jungle, but in support, not really. So I think Ne Zha feels okay right now, but it doesn't feel great. Next up is Knox. I think she's the best mage support right now, and by best, I mean she's a pretty average support overall, but for the rest of the mages, I think what she does is the best. She pulls relics very easily. I think she has some bad matchups, obviously, but I think her kit is always going to be really, really good in support. Not having to put herself out of position to CC somebody, and then also having a dash for safety. Her ult reduces the enemy's damage dealt. So if you have like a Zeus or something and you just ult the Zeus at the beginning of the fight's probably going to be over because that Zeus is going to be doing no damage, and he's going to be dying because he's going to be getting no damage off, and Zeus kind of tries to kill before getting killed. Yeah, Knox, overall, I think she's an average god, but she doesn't do anything that bad. Next up, Serqet. I don't know. Ever since they changed this god, I just don't. She's not fun to play anymore. She doesn't really do anything that well. She has solid CC. She plays for relics okay. She can punish people if they are relying on healing. This character just needs something. She's a bad jungler because she needs to be tanky, or if she builds full damage, she's just going to get one shot. It's just all messed up with Serqet. I think her kit is just in a bad spot. And honestly, I want them to kind of either rework her so she does damage with her current kit while building a little less power, or she gets a little rework so she builds full damage. She's not just absolutely useless in mid-game and late-game fights. So Serqet, I think she's a pretty dead character, IMO. Shiva. I actually think Shiva's in a really good spot for supports. He might be my favorite warrior support, either him or Herc. I might actually end up moving Herc up. I just think he's got I'm going to move him up. He's a little bit harder to play, so I think that was kind of why I was not wanting to put him up. But he is just super, super strong if you know how to play him. And that's why I think I'm going to put him in S tier. Shiva, a lot easier to play. Good upsides like Hercules. He peels pretty well. But his biggest thing is he just wants to get in there and engage. He's a very, very good engage god. because it's very hard to beads his abilities, or if he just blinks in and then doesn't use his relics, or I mean, he doesn't use his abilities, you're just kind of blowing beads for no reason. So Shiva, a very good engaged character. His peel is meh, but I think he's actually got a really strong 2v2. He's not all that safe until he hits level 3, so you have to be a little careful, make sure you're not getting ganked by those OP junglers. But Shiva, I think, is very strong. I think his build now is also really strong. Binding is incredible on him, and I think he's actually probably one of the best carry supports in the game because of how much damage he does. So Shiva, very strong. Sobek, I think Sobek is another average character. I think he's kind of similar to Bacchus, but Bacchus scales better into the late game, and Sobek is a little bit better early game. If I was to play him, I would probably build Regrowth, just because the strength of being able to pluck in and then hopefully you don't get blown up, being able to 3 and then run away, I think is just really, really strong. The item also is giving him extra protections instead of just health, which is always going to be a buff for every support. He just doesn't scale well into the late game. If you pluck somebody late game, a lot of times you're just going to get CC'd and then died and then killed. But in the mid game, if you can push your lead, be this uber tank that just sets up the enemy to kill, I think he does that really, really well. I can't really put him any higher because he doesn't really have a ton of upside. There's really not a big reason to play him. It's mostly just get that mid game and then get a lead and then hopefully you're unkillable. But if that late game does come, it doesn't matter kind of how far ahead you are. You're just going to kind of die. Next up, Sylv. I'm not as high on Sylv as other people. I think he's a pretty average character right now. Ankh is still incredible, which makes him just so 50-50. It's the same reason that I'll never think Terra is one of the best supports in the game, is because how strong Ankh is. But he's incredible in clearing buffs. He's incredible clearing waves. His 2v2 is very strong. Once you start grouping up, you try to punish him, your team can kind of win fights off that because of just how much CC his ult brings. The giant knockup that also does a good amount of damage. But he's always going to have problems where if he falls behind, he's useless, and junglers gank dual lane a lot early game, and he doesn't... I don't want to say he can't fight back, but if you are in a spot where you can't fight back and you try to run away, you're kind of just dead. So I think Sylv is in a average spot. I think he has really strong upsides, really clear upsides, but I think he's got pretty obvious downsides also. Well, I just said I don't think Terra will ever be one of the best. I think she's in a very good spot right now. Her 2v2 clear, her buff clear, her 2v2 fight, her lane clear is actually pretty solid right now, and I think she's really strong with nearly every single strong hunter right now, so she has really good pairings. Her 2v2, like I said, very strong. Her 3v3, also very, very strong. Her builds right now are very good. I have really no bad things to say about Terra. She doesn't really have CC immunity, but she builds Magi. She can build Spirit's Robe if you try to focus her, and then she can build Absolution. So I think she has pretty clear counters for keeping herself alive. And then I think building just one damage item into the late game like a Divine makes it so you can just one-shot an enemy backliner, and then instead of just playing to peel, you just play to win the team fight via killing the enemy. So Terra, I think, is incredible right now. Xing Chen is another character I think is in a pretty solid spot. Just get out of your 2v2. He's not a good 2v2 god. He plays basically just to live. But late game, if you can just get onto the enemy ADC and just hit them with 1-1, 90% of the time that team fight is going to be over because the enemy ADC is going to be useless over that entire time. And I think people underestimate that. His 1 is a 50% reduction to the enemy's auto attacks. So if you're going to get hit for 250 and then you won them, you'll now be getting hit for 125, basically making you twice as tanky against that character for the foreseeable future. Obviously, I think he's very bad in the 2v2s, but if you play kind of just to live that 2v2, I think he scales really well to the mid game, and he scales really well into the late game. And all he needs is one damage item like Divine right now to threaten the enemy backline, because he's got really good base numbers, and his ult is actually a lot of damage also. And then he just plays for relics. His 2 can pull beads, his ult can pull beads, and then he's also super safe, so he can play aggressive and then just still jump away with his 3. Next up, Yemoja. Kind of the same thing as Herc. If you know how to play her, she's absolutely busted. If you don't know how to play her, she's not going to feel too strong. I think she's in a good spot in this meta. She's above average and in what she does, but I think her weakness is not a lot of people know how to play her correctly, and I think they make this mistake of they think they kind of know how, but they don't. So they I don't know how to exactly word it, but they feel like they're doing a lot, but in reality they're not really doing that much, because Yemoja is very, very skill intensive even still. Her 3 placements, when you're spamming your 1s, when you're spamming your 2s, when you're trying to use your 3s to get your teammates out, when you're using your ult to peel, when you're using it for engage. There's a bunch of different things that her kit does that a lot of other gods don't really have. They don't really have that skill expression. But if you do know how to play this character, she's absolutely busted. If you don't, try to learn her. She's always going to be OP until they just change her kit. And lastly, Ymir. I think he's one of the best characters in the game. Again, you walk into the jungle, Ymir's always a threat. He's very strong clearing buffs. He's very strong clearing waves. His 2v2 is very strong. His passive, I think people underestimate it into the late game. His passive just makes everyone on his team tankier if he hits them with Frostbite, which is just hitting somebody with a damaging ability, or even just taking the slow of the ult on them. And I think people underestimate that. Ymir plays for relics really well. If you throw up your wall, you pull out, the enemy phantoms it, you just pull your wall down, you wait 12 seconds or whatever it is for his cooldown on his one at that point, and then you throw up the wall again, and then you have a free kill. So Ymir busted. Really good at a lot of things. The only thing is he's not too safe, but same thing as Khepri. You're not really walking into the jungle too much, and if you're playing in a 3v3 with your team, your mid, jungle, and you, he is one of the best 3v3 characters in the game. That was a really long and in-depth talking about all these characters. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys again next time. If you liked the video, please leave a like. Sorry it was long-winded if you didn't like that. If you did like that, that was for you. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys again next time. Peace.